Welcome to Realities in Communism. My name is Kendra Wesson, and I'm here with my good friend Elena Cubbage, who came here as a child from Cuba. And we're going to talk to her about her journey and the way it looked through her eyes as a young child and what she thought about America, and just get her full story.
All right, Elena, I think that a good place for us to start for everybody is I think that if you can just talk about your childhood, what it was like to grow up there, what your family was like, and what Cuba was like prior to Fidel Castro taking office. I think that'd be a really good place. We can build a dynamic difference in the change of that. So, when is your birthday?
My birthday is May 12th. I was born in 1948, and I'm an only child. And my dad, his name was Luis Rafael Galanena, and he was an MD. He was a pediatrician in Cuba. And my mom, typical of in those days of Cubans, mothers normally didn't work, so she was at home. And I went to a Catholic school. It was called in English the Sacred Heart, and it was a huge school that started in kindergarten all the way through 13. We had 13 grades instead of 12, and it was also a boarding school. I didn't board because I lived in Havana.
But the rest of the students had to come.
The ones that didn't live in the area, they would just they lived there,
Okay.
until they would go home for holidays or whatever. And the reason I'm bringing that up because that is a pivotal part of the last day that I was in school and what happened that day. And my dad said, "That's it. You're not going back. You're staying home. We have to figure out a way to get you out of Cuba."
So you said you grew up in Havana, Cuba?
Yes. I grew up in Havana, Cuba. And when I left, I was 11 and a half. And I'll go into that later on. But I was 11 and a half, and I did come by myself. And but I had a place to go to. So some friends that lived in Miami, Florida. I first went over there for a short while waiting for my mom and dad, hopefully to get out. You never knew when you came if they were going to let your parents out or not.
So prior to you leaving and prior to you turning 11, so many of us today see like images of Cuba and it's just run down and it looks, I don't want to say disgusting, but it looks
Yes,
deplorable.
it is deplorable.
What was it like before that? Was it like bustling cities? Was it
All over, we actually we were what they call the Pearl of the Antilles, all the islands and everything around there. We had a lot of Americans. We had people from all over the world come. Cuba's a beautiful place. And right now, it's heartbreaking for me to see what I see. Like I said, I follow that blog, Babalu blog, and I get to see what goes on over there, and it just brings tears to my eyes to see how dilapidated it is. And we just, you didn't have to be super rich to have a good life, and we had a lot of Americans in Cuba. In fact, we belonged to a country club. Well, actually, when I was real little, it was Miramar Yacht Club. And then I don't remember a whole lot about that. But later on, Biltmore Country Club. And we had so many Americans because they were with the oil companies. And they were just placed in Cuba. And they loved our country. They didn't want to leave. Because life wasn't as expensive. Just about anybody could get help of any kind that you wanted to. And it was just like what you're used to here in the United States. And now not only do they not have anything, you're constantly being, somebody in your neighborhood will turn you in if you are anything against, the regime, the communist regime.
It's curious that you say that. So when you look at just history in general, when communist dictators take over, you see that parts of the community turn. You saw it in World War II when Hitler took over, that other Germans would turn Jews in and who are hiding Jews.
Same way in Cuba.
And it's fascinating that that's...
Communism always works the same way.
And what was that in your eyes? How did it work in your eyes?
In my eyes, being that little, I didn't see that much of that because it wasn't happening at the time. But maybe this is a good time for me to tell you exactly why, I no longer went back to school, and my dad figured out a way that I could, come out. We had Mass every morning. Being a Catholic school, we had Mass every morning, and everybody went to Mass before any of the classes started. And we were, lining up to go to class, and all of a sudden we hear all this racket and noise and all this horrible, we didn't know what was going on. And we see all these dirty, filthy militia guys with their bazookas or whatever, their rifles or whatever, coming through. And they had intended to go straight to where our church, to where our, where we were having Mass, because they were after to ransack the whole thing and take, Catholic churches usually have a lot of gold and, lots of things. So anything like that, that's what they were going to do. Well, the nuns were, of course, mortified, and they tried to get us out of the way, and we did get kind of pushed aside, but they, that was the scariest experience that I remember of what it was like under Castro. Once he finally came out and said, he actually for a whole year, he did not say, anything. And in a year's time, he lied. And that's typically what these people do. They lied, same way with Hitler, same way, with everybody. They get in there and then top down, and they lie.
So when you saw the militia come into your school, how did you feel?
Very scared. We were all very scared because we didn't know, and so little we really didn't know. But I mean, who knows? They could have taken some of the nuns, and molested them, and actually they put us over in, in different rooms and started calling our parents, and my mom, came to get me. And my dad said, "That's your last day at school. Not going back." And because you didn't know what was going to happen. They could have started shooting. As far as we knew, as far as I know, I didn't hear any gunshots. But they were sure. I mean, we're not talking one or two. We're talking like maybe 20 or 30.
Of them all carrying rifles.
Come in at the same time,
And that's crazy to think about that. They came into the church.
The church was in our school. It's a huge school because it was also a boarding school. So we're talking, it's a huge school, Sacred Heart in Havana, Cuba, and that's just what happened. And that's the thing that has always stayed in my mind, how scary that was, because any of us could have gotten, pulled over, shot, whatever. Maybe that did happen at some point. It didn't right then. When we were pulled over.
So when you got home that night, do you remember anything of what your parents said, or read their emotion and how they felt about it?
Yes, my dad said, now this is proof that Castro is a communist, and we are going to find a way to get out of Cuba. And he knew we couldn't all leave at the same time. They were not going to allow that.
So he said that it's proof now that he is. So was there
him there was proof.
So was there any talk about that it possibly could be, or was it just kind of like a flip of a switch?
No, it was a flip of the switch because my dad, knew. He kept seeing everything that was going on. See, what people don't understand is Cuba had a lot of bad dictators, but there's a difference sometimes between a dictator and a Marxist or a communist. I mean, dictators are just crooked. The money goes to them. Fulgencio Batista was who was there. Well, yeah, he was just a dictator and corrupt. But, and he did kill a lot of people. He was not a communist. And there's a difference. You know, communism is, we still had a kind of a normal life, at least us. Maybe his enemies didn't. He put them in prison or whatever. But, you know, the rest of the people had, you know, just normal lives like what we do here in the United States, what we're used to. And in fact, we had a lot of Americans in our, you know, in our country club. They'd say, we don't want to go back to the United States. We get, you know, they could get help, inexpensive. You know, you had maids that lived with you and cooks and so forth. And it was safe. And it was a beautiful country, you know.
So then what changed?
The fact that I think for once the United States and the oil companies, the ones that I remember, you know, saw what was going on, they had them out of there because they knew, I'm talking the American companies, wanted the Americans out of there. So what changed for me was that we knew that it was said that we would be taken away from our parents to go to school. And instead of doing
the government
that,
was going to take you.
the government made you go. Like here, they teach you, they indoctrinate you in our classrooms. This is why I'm opposed to CRT, because they're doing that indoctrination in the classrooms, because there's millions and millions and millions of kids all over the United States. They can't take them to just camps like, you know, I was going to go.
I just want to make sure I get this right, because that is insane to think about, that the government took the children from the homes of their parents to teach them whatever the government thought was
they
the
said
right.
that you now schools would be away from home. You know, they made it all sound great. Now the schools will be away from home, and we were going to be taken to, you know, to like a what they call a boarding school. But it's totally away from home, and you were not allowed to go home maybe twice, you know, like for Christmas and another time. I can't
So
remember.
were the
when.
parents there okay with this? Like, did they
No,
just like...
no, they had no choice. You know, they knew it was going to happen. And the reason my dad found out a lot about this is because a lot of his, I guess, patients worked for the government. And at the time they had switched over, you know, from Batista to Castro. And they started telling him what was going to happen. And they were even saying, Dr. Elena, you might want to have your daughter leave Cuba because it's never going to be the same.
Do you remember, or did your parents ever tell you a story of a parent that stood against the government and was like, no, you're not taking my child?
I don't remember any of that, because we then, since I didn't go back to school, we kind of cut relations, you know, with everything else that was going around. So we focused on how is it that I'm going to get out. And I don't remember the whole procedure, other than I think some of my dad's, I wouldn't call them militia at the time. Well, I guess they had switched over, but they still, you know, wanted my dad to know what was going to happen, and they helped him get the papers and everything ready for me to get out, and then my mom to get out later on. Of course, when we left, all you were allowed to take was $5.
When you left Cuba to go to America.
Right, $5 is all you could bring. You couldn't bring anything else. They checked you everything. I remember that my mom went with me to the airport. And
just before we continue, just so everyone knows, what year is this that you left?
I left in Castro took over in 59. We didn't find out he was communist. He didn't really come around until about a year later, so 1960. So I left shortly after that, somewhere almost close to November of 1960, I'm thinking. Maybe a little bit more than that. I kind of I've forgotten some of that stuff, but I'm almost positive it was November. And, you know, she couldn't follow me to the gate. You know, I mean, there was no such thing. Once you were leaving, they took you away and you had to say goodbye. And I remember my mom just waving at me.
I think this is really important. Who took you away? Like, where'd you go?
They had guards.
The government,
The government, the regime had guards, and we had to go and be searched.
and
So
the
that
government
means you
let
totally
you leave.
After you were searched. And this is going to sound pretty unbelievable to most Americans, but the truth of the matter is we had to disrobe, no clothes on. They wanted to make sure you weren't taking anything out.
What were they worried about? Do you know? Like,
Well, to be kind of blunt, children wouldn't do this, but a lot of people that tried to leave before, since they wouldn't let you take any money, if they had like gold jewelry or something, they would swallow, something like that, thinking that they could have that,
When they
would
get-
pass through, what I'm talking about.
so when you left in 1960, how many kids joined you?
Well, I wasn't, like I said, I went to a Cuban family in Miami, Florida, so I was just living with them at the time. So, how many kids joined me while they were checking you?
Yeah, like how many people were trying to get out of Cuba at that time?
Oh, I think lots of people. I mean, many people. The airports were full of kids that parents were putting on planes to go, and they also came with a thing. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Probably most Americans haven't. Called Peter Pan, which I believe it's got started by a Catholic priest. I think he was from Florida, and he had like flights that would go down there, and I think Catholic Charities is who helped for these flights. And this is all in the, if anybody wants to do any research, this is all on the internet. And they took out thousands of kids that were brought here to the United States away from their parents. Some of them never saw their parents again because their parents couldn't get out. And they came here, and they were placed in different places. Some people lived with Americans that said that they would till they got to be older. And I mean, I was just one of the lucky ones that my mom and dad were finally able to get out. I saw them I saw my dad a year later.
So you arrived in Miami, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
How did you cross from Cuba to Miami?
Oh, I was one of the lucky ones. I came in an airplane.
So on an airplane.
Yeah, just
Okay.
an airplane.
So I think that it'd be really
I wasn't like a lot of them you see now. A lot of them are desperate to leave. They come in small boats, maybe not even boats, to just,
Dinghies.
just dinghies. And a lot of them die in the ocean.
I think that it'd be really, really important and vital. For the viewers, what was the condition of Cuba when you left?
Everything looked normal other than, as far as Cuba wasn't run down. There wasn't enough time. It looked like it did before. It's just that the government had switched over. Now you had militia people all over the place.
Was freedom of speech still allowed? Do you remember?
You were kind of, neighbors could turn you in if they thought you were, against some people were so indoctrinated that they got to the point that if they thought you were against it, they could have turned you in, and they could have come over and arrested you, I guess.
And so they could have
weren't there. I wasn't there long enough to see that.
So you got out just before that, but after you left, if people spoke out against the government,
oh, absolutely,
they'd be arrested.
It's to this day. Some of them you never see again. They're probably done away with and shot or whatever. Yes,
so your parents saw the writing on the wall.
Yeah, especially my dad, and that's because, like I said, some of his patients kind of filled him in. They couldn't leave. They didn't have the money to be able to leave. We could buy the tickets and stuff, but once you left Cuba, you left everything behind. Nothing belonged to you anymore. Wow. And the only way I got some of the things out that we did later on is because my aunt, my dad's sister, worked at the Canadian Embassy, and she was able to take some of the things that we could, that we were able to give to her. And she had them with her, and she took them to the Canadian Embassy, and she sent that through the Canadian Embassy to us here in the States later on. And so Mother actually did get some gold things and some jewelry when she was in Miami by herself, and at Homestead, Florida. I don't know if you've ever heard, that's where the FEMA camp was for the Cuban refugees. And she was there by herself because my dad wasn't here. and so she was able to sell some of the pawn shops, and get some money for gold jewelry. Because we had quite a bit of that.
When you were
Couldn't bring it all.
traveling here, do you remember what it felt like to be leaving your parents, especially so
Yes.
young? Like, what did that
It was very
feel like?
It was very scary. But the scariest in Miami, it wasn't so much. But that's not the whole story. Then I'm sure you've heard about the Bay of Pigs, how that was going to be happening.
Of course.
And my folks were afraid that I was going to be stuck here by myself. And, as an only child, and them maybe never getting out. So somehow or other, it's all confusing at the time. But I did go back to Cuba for a short time.
How old were
Because
you
of
when you
that.
went back?
Probably almost 12.
Okay,
12
so
something.
same year.
Same, yeah. It was fairly close.
And you went back because of Bay of Pigs?
Well, because when that happened, then we didn't really know. It's kind of all fuzzy, but we didn't know they didn't want me stuck here by myself. If they thought, because I was living with a Cuban couple, but they had their own family. Nobody had any money, you understand. So everybody was struggling. Everybody that came out, because the people that had money in Cuba had no money when they came here, because you couldn't take out anything. You lost everything.
Because it didn't all belong to the government.
Right. Everything belonged to the government, your house, but it got to the point, one of the reasons that we were also leaving is Castro had said, and the same thing that they're talking about here, that certain people, your house, they may bring in some people, to you've heard that or seen that maybe, that some people may have to move in with you. Well, that was going to be the thing in there too. Our house was big enough, it wasn't huge, but it was big and it had 3 bedrooms. And then because we had our maid, Caridad, who was part of our family, really. I mean, she wasn't related to us, but she was our maid for so long. She had her bedroom, in the other part of the house, kind of by the garage. And so, because we had extra room, we knew that they would bring in total strangers to live in with us, because that was one of their plans. And so that kind of sent a red flag to me when I read not too long ago that that's what this administration plans to do. Your house might be, I can't remember exactly how they worded it, but your house is not your house anymore. We're going to bring in some people. I don't know if you guys have read that or not.
Of course.
But,
so after Bay of Pigs, did you come back to America?
I got out again, and that time.
How did you get out that time?
Well, I still, because of my dad's connection with the militia, the old militia people, I don't remember how it all went out, but this time I was going to Dubuque, Iowa. And why Dubuque, Iowa is because my dad's, one of his best friends, he owned the Dubuque Meat Packing Company in Cuba, but his boss was the owner of the Dubuque Meat Packing Company, which was a huge company in Dubuque, Iowa. And so I went to live with them. And the Mr. Gutierrez, the Cuban man that owned the Dubuque Meat Packing Company in Cuba, he was in Cuba, but his wife had come out with his daughter, her husband, who were young, probably in their 20s, late 20s, they were married, and her brother. And we all lived in this, Dubuque was I love Dubuque, other than the cold. I'd never seen snow before, and I certainly got a lot of snow over there while I lived there. But anyway, I lived with them, and she kind of became, the older lady. She kind of became my mom at the time. We were roommates, so here I was a young girl, and we roomed together, because we didn't have a whole lot, and her, Blanquita, the couple that was married, they both knew English really well, because in Cuba you had to have English. Was at our school you had to have English.
So were you a
So I knew
fluent
English
speaker?
but book English and speaking English is two different
So
things.
you spoke a broken English when you came
Right,
here.
but I could understand it. So that it was huge help. And the same way, with the people that I lived with, they all knew English because they well educated, and you had to have English. Actually, when I was a little girl, you had to have your classes were in Spanish. You had to have English, and you had to have Latin because it was a Catholic school, and our prayers and our missals and all of that was in Latin. Our masses were in Latin, so we had to know that.
Do you still speak Latin?
I don't we didn't speak it. It was just
Read.
read, for the church and stuff. But we had to have it, and then you also had to choose another language, and I chose French. So, our school was hard in Cuba. I mean, my school was.
But I'm going to assume that changed.
Well, I wasn't there,
Well,
so
I guess we
yeah.
can. I guess
Right.
a form of conjecture. We can
Right.
assume that
Oh,
it changed
yeah. That
with
doesn't. Yeah.
the way it is now.
No, I mean I can't imagine that it would be.
So, after you got here and you spent some time here, what were the things that you noticed that were so different between Castro's Cuba government and America's government?
Well, you could definitely tell that it was a tyrannical regime, and it was just going to get a lot worse. And if you didn't toe the line, you would disappear in the middle of the night, or be shot, whatever. I mean, and being a young girl, my dad tried to, not to go too much into that, but he knew what was going to. If you know history, people don't understand how important history is. If you don't know history, you can be fooled about anything, and we're living in those days right now, in my opinion, in my humble opinion.
So,
People don't understand what's going on because they've never experienced it, and unless you experience something, you don't know.
so as your dad saw the writing on the wall in Cuba, do you feel that you see some writing on the walls in America today?
Oh, absolutely. I have for quite a while.
So you were 12 when you got here, and you've grown up here. What is the change that you've seen coming from leaving a communist country to the free nation of America, growing up here, raising your children here, to now the America today? What are the differences that you see?
Well, in my opinion, what's going on right now is especially something that I hadn't totally quite seen before, and this is with that critical race theory that I'm so totally opposed, because they're pitting people. You can see what they're doing. Here they're doing it with class, and the blacks and the whites and the this and the gays and then, anything to just split you up and divide you. That is a typical way that Marxists. There's really not much difference between Marxism, communism. I mean, it's just all the same kind of
So
thing.
in America, they're splitting on some of those class differences. In Cuba, how did Fidel split the population?
It wasn't so much the black and white, because we have a lot of blacks in Cuba. We also had a mixed race that we've always had called mulattoes. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I have not.
And blacks marrying whites. So we had some of that, way back then. And but they didn't split it that way. They didn't make it so much that I remember. It was just the fact that they wanted to get rid of freedom. That was their main thing. It wasn't so much this class and that class. They just came down and flat out say, we're not that way anymore, and this is it. This is what it's going to be. And you either towed the line or you ended up in prison. I mean, people are imprisoned all the time for speaking out in Cuba nowadays over nothing, And like I say, I've even gotten to be. It's been really special for me to have found this blog. I guess you call it a blog, yeah, Babalu blog, because I've actually made some friends on this blog that I've never met in my life, and I have learned so much about what they're going through.
So recently, across America, we saw the protests happening in Cuba about their government. How does that make you feel, especially when you see American flags being raised in Cuba as they tried to protest their current government?
Heartbreaking that we are at that point, in my opinion, because this is something that always happens when you're going through a horrible revolution, and it had, and we've had revolution in this country right now. Black Lives Matter is a perfect example. They use the quote Black Lives Matter to make it sound, like, oh gosh, Black lives do matter. Well, sure they do, but Black Lives Matter is a Marxist organization, and if people don't want to believe that, all they have to do is pull it up and see who all started it.
It's crazy.
It's there, and people just, they look at you like, gosh, she must be a racist. Not at all. They're really good about, what's the word in English? Just, to switch things around, to make you feel guilty.
Like gaslighting.
Gaslighting, that's the word. To make you feel, and a lot of people, I have a lot of Cuban friends, honestly, that don't speak up because they just don't feel comfortable doing it.
So will people in Cuba today still disappear if they speak out against the government?
Oh, yes. Or killed, or yes. I'm talking here in America. They don't feel comfortable speaking up. And that's fine. That's the beauty about America. You have your choice to do it. I choose to do it,
And why is that so important to you?
Because my dad said to me, don't ever forget how we lost our country. And if you ever have to speak up, speak up. I remember, not when I was little so much, but, through the years, and because, my dad finally came out, he was one of the lucky ones that when he came out with a couple of his old militia people that kind of helped him get all the papers and everything out, we had to move around a lot, but he was a doctor. So when he first came out, he went to Homestead, Florida, and he was a doctor for all the refugees that were coming in. And then this was kind of funny. My dad, I loved living in Miami. I was in Dubuque, Iowa 1 year till my dad came out, and the three of us got together and moved to Miami to a little bitty duplex.
What was that like when you first got to see him again?
Oh, it was, not only him, but my mom too. Because we,
What was that reunion like? Try to give us the
it was very emotional, very emotional. That we were finally together, and just the three of us, and which, it's just kind of hard to explain. I mean, we were one of the lucky ones that, and there's thousands of people that are lucky. I don't mean that, but some weren't so lucky. Some never saw their parents again.
Do you have any friends that didn't make it?
I don't know because you couldn't really know so much that. I mean, you kind of lose contact. I do have some friends, that I know where they are. A lot of them stayed in Miami. My dad's words were, "There's too many Cubans in Miami. We've got to leave." Too many Cubans, too many Cuban doctors. We have to leave, and so we moved to Terrell, Texas, and for my dad, the important thing was that, and this is going to sound funny, but he was able to go to like mental institutions, state hospitals, and a lot of American doctors didn't want to be in those, but my dad truly was a doctor, and so they needed, so in Terrell, Texas, he worked at a mental hospital, kind of like what we had here in Norman until they closed down. Central State. I don't know if you remember that.
When he came here, did he tell you any stories that he experienced?
He didn't really want to talk about it much. So, no, I don't remember us talking. I think we kind of wanted to put all that kind of behind us, And we never got to see, we never got to see, go back for, when his sister died, when, our family died. Down there, he had two sisters, couldn't go back to that one. My grandmother stayed in Cuba. She lived with us. She decided she didn't want to come out. She was too old. She wanted to stay there. We never could. Whenever you tried to place a call to Cuba, the government on purpose would have you sit by the phone, and they said, we don't know when we're going to connect you. And sometimes it would be 7 hours, 8 hours. They could have done it immediately. That was just part of punishment because you left. I mean, that's just the way it was.
So when you see Americans today that so openly embody and embrace the idea of like communism. What does that? How does that make you feel? Especially because they don't know what it's like to live there. They just see the ideas of what communism
They like
is in a
the
textbook.
ideology. It all sounds really good. It's never going to be that way. It destroys every country. It destroys families. Actually, there were some people that got so indoctrinated with Castro that, in fact, I met somebody that I didn't know before from Cuba that her mother chose to, when her dad decided, and they got a large family, decided to leave Cuba, the mother was so indoctrinated that she just left her kids and left her husband and stayed in Cuba, and the family came over here.
So what message do you have for those that are looking to change America to that or want that here? What message do you have for them?
If you want to become a Cuba, and more than that, if you want to become a Venezuela, and most of us in our area, right, in our time frame, I guess is the right word to say, right now, most of us know what happened in Venezuela and what is continuing to happen in Venezuela. They have nothing. They're like Cuba, and people are desperate. They're eating their dogs. I know this sounds gross. I'm sorry. I'm having to tell you these things, but they don't have food. They're, whatever they can eat, they do anything that they can do, and they were the richest country in Latin America just 10 years ago. It doesn't take very much time because of their oil, and Cuba uses Venezuela's oil, and Cuba right now sends doctors all over the world. They get paid maybe $1 an hour, and they're like slaves. You become a slave to the government. People don't understand that. And I'll never forget when I had to take care of my mom for 4 years after Daddy died, and I didn't want to put her into a nursing home because her English wasn't the best and all of this. And I had ladies that kind of helped me at night, and I did 2 shifts a day for 4 years. And she had a lot of 4 surgeries in the meantime. It was a crazy time. But anyway, one of the girls that helped was for a family had left Venezuela, and she came over to help me some. And she told me some stories, and she looked at me in the face and she said, "We should have listened to you Cubans, but we thought that would never happen here to us in Venezuela."
And that's the message for them.
That's the message. That's the message for everybody. You never think it's going to happen in your country. And so, one of the stories she told me, she said it got to the point that we knew we had to leave. We had a car, and you didn't stop at red lights because somebody could come over with a gun and say, "Get out of the car," and take your car away. And things like that happen all the time, and they were lucky enough to leave. And when they got here, I don't remember, exactly how long they were in Norman, but she was very important for me to kind of find out how she felt. It was the same thing that we went through in Cuba. The transmission. They didn't believe it. They thought it was going to be great. They never thought anything bad. They also elected Maduro, which was the president.
I think a lot of people forget Fidel Castro was elected.
He was elected.
Duly elected.
Duly elected. Duly elected. Not cheating or whatever. But I will tell you this, and this to me is the saddest thing, and I think a lot of people probably don't know this. Castro's best friend, Castro proclaimed to be Catholic, Roman Catholic. He went to Catholic schools. He went to I can't remember, universities. He had, he continued his friendship with, with this priest forever and ever. He got this priest to go around all over, Cuba with him, saying we need to change the government, all of this, I'm the right person. He was with them the whole time. He finally, at the end, towards later on, he kind of, this priest, I don't remember his name right off the bat, that like I said, grew up with him, and just like they were twins, they were always together. And this priest said, "Fidel, are you a communist?" "Oh, no, I'm not a communist." Well, a year after Fidel finally came out and said, "This is it, top down. We're communist." Um, you know, this Jesuit, he was a Jesuit. He became a Jesuit priest, and they went to Catholic schools together. He looked at him, and Castro told Che, he says, "So you're a communist?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "I can't go for that." He had him shot dead. And who shot him? Che Guevara.
That's crazy.
People don't know that. They can go to the internet and they can see that. I have seen that video. It's there.
That is absolutely insane. Well, I appreciate you coming on and talking with us. I think that it is very, very important for people to understand that there are people alive today that have lived through communism.
I'm just one of many, and there's probably a lot of other people in Norman. Well, I don't know about a lot, but there's some people in Norman that maybe. One of my friends that used to live here, she doesn't live here anymore, and she's from Cuba. She never really liked, to talk about it much, and that's fine. And there's a man in Oklahoma City that was very. I didn't meet him till recent, maybe the last 3 or 4 years, and I don't believe he's in very good health right now, and he goes to a Catholic church up in Oklahoma City, and he was very vocal, and he always spoke and wrote, and. But those people are few and far in between, because you get a lot of dirty looks, and people look the other way, and people don't want to talk to you, and you lose friends over it, really, because they think you're wrong, and they think, how in the world can you? What do you have against the fact they hated Trump? They hate Trump because of how he talks. Well, the way I look at Trump is he's not a perfect person, but nobody is. But what he did for our country, he loves America. And so, however he talks is of no consequence to me. He's not perfect. I'm not perfect. And so, he did so much for, and I'm not trying to be political there. I'm just telling you, there's a lot of things about him that I don't like. That's not the reason I was for him, and I still, hope he runs again. Because he truly, you saw where we were at, and now you see where we're headed.
Absolutely.
Because they, and the media is our worst enemy in this country.
I guess that may be something that we did miss. Was there a media or a propaganda arm in Cuba that kind of pushed his message?
I don't remember being so little. I didn't pay that much attention to that kind of thing. But yes, I'm sure there was.
Yeah.
I'm really sure there was. But here in this country, there's absolutely no doubt that the mainstream media, isn't, they're the right, we wouldn't have the division that we have, in my humble opinion, that we have right now if we didn't have people that only watch mainstream media.
Well, Elena, I appreciate you coming on, and I hope that your story can just impact somebody. If it changes one person's opinion on how communism was.
If anybody ever wants to, I'm not opposed to, talking to anybody about it. I'm just... I want people to know what I consider to be the truth. And honestly, if you have lived it, I think that should make it credible.
Of course.
And what I'm seeing now, I don't like anything that I see. I haven't for quite a long time.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.